Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Mr. President. It gives me great pleasure and an honour today to introduce Kate Atkin, a friend of mine for many years and a colleague also. Kate was in fact the first female director on the Professional Speaking Association, because I asked her. The board was male, pale and stale. I'm not sure we can even say that these days. And Kate came into the board and calmed some of the boys down who were making silly and outrageous statements. Kate started her training and speaking business over 20 years ago after a successful career with Barclays Bank. In 2015, she completed research into the imposter syndrome. In a way, I thought it was called the Impostor Phenomenon, but Kate will no doubt clear that up. I think she told me off for calling it a syndrome once. With successful entrepreneurs, and we'll explain a lot more about this during the session. She is co-author of The Confident Manager, The Presentation Workout, and a co-author of The Business of Professional Speaking. She tells me she was a shy Lincolnshire lass. That's a shy Lincolnshire girl. I don't know if lass translates across the pond from a farming background. I would never have thought that. Kate never dreamt she would have the sort of knowledge and expertise that has made her in demand as a professional speaker, trainer, and facilitator. Kate and I flew to the USA, to Orlando, for one NSA meeting, fantastic one. And in fact, Kate got me to take a picture of her talking to Zig Ziglar. What a photo that was, and it's amazing. I wish I'd have got a photo with me with Zig Ziglar. Anyway, for today, she's speaking on success. What lies behind the mask? An exploration of the imposter syndrome. Please give a Golden Gate breakfast welcome to Kate Atkin.
Thank you very much, Derek. So yes, the success, what lies behind the mask, an exploration of the imposter syndrome. And yeah, you're absolutely right, Derek. Knuckles get wrapped when it's a syndrome. It's really a phenomenon, which I'll talk about in a moment. So I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for asking me to attend and talk to you all this morning on what I think is a fascinating subject. So I'm hoping in the next 30 minutes, I will fascinate you too. I've got a confession to make though. I'm going to start with a quote, and having heard some of the comments that's been mentioned this morning, I'm now going, oh, should I be starting with this quote? So my quote is from Henry Ford: whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. And being shy, being the one of the three of us that was nervous, I'd really worked on my mindset. I'd really worked on building up my confidence. I've really tried hard to get that thinking that I could do things. And yet, in 2013, I decided that Henry Ford may be wrong. And I'd like to tell you why. So as Derek said, growing up in rural Lincolnshire, the middle one of three girls on a rural farm, east coast of England, near the original Boston, not the one that Massachusetts is named after. And my comfort zone was in amongst the chickens and the geese. Very happy doing that. Never dreamt that I would be doing what I'm doing now, which used to be, till 12 months ago, standing up and presenting for a living, and won a few awards through Toastmasters, Junior Chamber International, as Derek's mentioned, authored a couple of books. I've recently moved back to rural Lincolnshire. So I left the county 30 years ago and have recently moved back. So 18 months ago, my husband and I bought the 300-year-old cottage that I used to dream of living in as a child when I walked around the village with my mum, and we had the chance to buy it. And I am delighted to be back here. And I ought to introduce you really to the love of my life, who is lying next to my husband in the bottom left-hand corner. So she is Poppy the dog, and my husband is Stuart. I do have a master's in positive psychology, and it was during the course of my studies that I came across the research by Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes on what they called and termed the imposter phenomenon, which is why I rethought Henry Ford's quote. Now, we tend to think we've got this mindset. We've got to get the mindset to believe we can do things. And as I've mentioned, I worked for years to get that mindset right. And yet, in the back of my own mind, I was going, yeah, but what if this time it doesn't work out? What if this time you stuff up? What if this time? And that will prove all of the others were a fluke. So that's the problem with sometimes the positive thinking. when it gets combined with an internal feeling of intellectual phoniness or phoniness of some sort, because the imposter phenomenon actually gets somebody thinking that they can't do it, even though the external evidence says they can. And I am sure that some of you may have met people who think they can do stuff when the external evidence says they can't. So at times, maybe Henry Ford is wrong. And I'd like to take the next 25 minutes to explain a little bit about why and a little bit about the imposter chatter that some of us, but not everybody, experiences. So the imposter chatter is not about being a true imposter. It's not about being a real fraud. And I was listening to the introductions there, and Tom, you mentioned that you'd made a mistake, and that aspect of, we think sometimes if we make a mistake, you've got that Mudhead award, but actually making that mistake is something that we tend to do. It's a natural part of life, but we're not deliberately doing so. We're not actually setting out to defraud people, unlike the person that nicked Jim's data. I was like, that's shocking. That's a true fraud. But sometimes when we make a mistake, we think that we are exposing our fraudulence to the world. So it's an internal feeling of phoniness despite the external evidence of success. So you're not really an imposter or a fraudster, nor is it a syndrome, in that a syndrome is a connotation with a mental health condition. The syndrome has that. I'm just going to pause for a second and see if somebody can mute all. Okay, so the syndrome has that connotation back to a mental health condition. It has that connotation to, I am suffering from something, whereas a phenomenon is an occurrence at certain points in time, which some people experience on a really intense feeling, and other people might get a light touch of it and it's no problem whatsoever. But it is an internal feeling of fraudulence. It's not deliberate fraudulence, and nobody on the outside can see it, but it is wondering when you are going to be found out. And so sometimes with the positive thinking that we have, and we think we can do it, our minds are going, yes, but what if this time you're going to get found out? It's different from self-doubt, and self-doubt is normal. And I would argue that self-doubt is really healthy. It stops us having arrogance. It stops us having that hubris, but it keeps us in check when we're doing something for the first, second, or perhaps third time. But actually, the self-doubt differs from the imposter style self-doubt, where you're doing something for the 13th or the 30th time. You've already got the track record of success, and you are still wondering whether or not you're going to be okay at what you're doing. So there are some problems with the imposter phenomenon. There are some problems and some issues that it causes for some people. And one of the things that happens is that it can prevent people from recognizing their knowledge, skills, and capabilities. So instead of internalizing the success, we externalize it by going, ah, yes, but just happened to be right place, right time. Ah, yes, but, those books, I mean, it just so happened that Pearson's contacted me. It wasn't really anything that was, somebody else could easily have written that. Ah, yes, but the first book I wrote was the story was helped to be crafted by somebody else, and it was self-published, so that doesn't really count. And yes, but and so we have this yes, but, and we don't internalize the knowledge, skills, and capabilities that we have. When I first turned up to the University of East London to do my master's, it was intense for me for the imposter chatter going on, because I had not gone to a grammar school. In the UK, there's an exam that you take when you leave primary education to go to secondary school, and it sorts out whether you are academic and clever, you go to the grammar school. If you're not academic and not clever, you are practical and you go to the secondary modern school. So I dropped into the practical secondary modern school, didn't have a first degree, and turn up at university thinking that I can't do this stuff, even though other external evidence of me taking exams through my banking career said that I could do it. And then it can stop people putting themselves forward for promotion or new tasks. It can stop people from actually saying, do you know what, hands up, I'd like to have a crack at that, please. And I would never have put myself forward to be on the board of the Professional Speaking Association. Absolutely not. It took Derek to ask me to do it, and some time for me really thinking about whether or not I would be able to or capable of doing it. And Derek's encouragement was what persuaded me, because generally speaking, people with the imposter chatter won't put themselves forward for new tasks or promotion within the workplace. And the problem with it is not necessarily the top two things, because some people find they push through it anyway and they do put themselves forward, but they experience the third one on the screen, this high level of stress, of anxiety. And sometimes in some academic research, it's linked to depression. And some people will also indulge in self-sabotaging behaviors. So as somebody's already mentioned, staying up a little bit late, imbibing in a lots of alcohol. And actually then today, maybe a little bit more blurry, the performance might not be quite so good. So therefore you can blame the outcome on, yes, but I stayed up the night before. So a self-sabotaging behavior can be that sort of thing, or it can be procrastination, delaying tactics, and then you blame it for, I did it in a rush at the last minute, so it wasn't really my best effort. So these are some of the issues that the imposter chatter can cause. And for me personally, the stress manifested itself in severe stomach aches. I hadn't twigged that was the case, but now I know more about the imposter phenomenon, having come across the research by Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes when I was doing my master's in positive psychology. I then thought, ooh, that's really me. So I've unpicked it a lot more. And during the course of my master's, I wrote my dissertation and interviewed 12 entrepreneurs on this topic. And I am now 3 years into what may well be a 6-year project, but it's a part-time PhD looking at it from a doctorate perspective and looking at the phenomenon in the world of work and how it impacts people. So that's me and my experience, just a little bit. What's your experience been of this? And we do have a poll to ask you. So I'm going to launch the poll and invite you to take part and answer the questions that, yes, you can see on the screen, but if you can answer them from the polling perspective, we'll also be able to see percentages as to how many people in this call may have experienced it. A is where you've experienced it, but it hasn't held you back. The second option is where you've personally experienced it, but yep, at times it has held you back. C is I've not experienced it myself, but I do know others who have. And D is none of the above. So let's have a quick look and see how many of you have experienced this or not, as the case may be. And I'm just looking, we've got a few votes coming in now. We've got about half of you voted. So we'll carry on just a little bit more. We've got a few seconds longer to put in your votes. Do please click submit if you can see that. And if you can't see the poll, if for some reason you're on a different device and the poll hasn't come up, feel free to put A, B, C, or D into the chat. So if we launch the poll results and share those with you, you'll notice that we have 36% of people saying they've experienced it and it has held them back at times, and 36% of people saying they've experienced it and it's not held them back at times. So if I do a quick maths, we're talking about roughly 70% of folks on this call have experienced this phenomenon at some point in their lives, which I find fascinating, because what we also note from academic research is that 70% of people will experience it at some point in their lives. Some people find it is an intense experience and it does hold them back. And some people find it's a light touch and they can push through it anyway. And it's interesting from a research perspective that both men and women experience this phenomenon. And what I've noticed on the demographics of the call is that there are a lot more men than there are women on this call. So actually having that 70% in that top two questions, top two answers, is a really interesting perspective too, because it absolutely bears out the academic research that 70% of some people at some point in their lives will experience this. So what's the internal chatter like if you have the imposter phenomenon? For those of you who are in the bottom categories, the bottom two, saying, not experienced it myself, but I know somebody who has, or somebody going, no, I don't think I know anybody that I've experienced, none of the above applies to me. The chances are you don't realize, because people don't tend to talk about this, because we think we're wearing a mask to the outside world. We think what the outside world sees is not the real us. And if only they knew what was going on the inside, then they'd realize we're not as good, we're not as successful, we're not as capable as they think we are. So we do want to be successful desperately. And I say we because I'm including me in this. You know, we really want to have that level of success, and we go, woohoo, fantastic when we get success. But it quite often followed by a lurch, and it's like, oh no, now I've got to live up to that standard next time. So the idea of doing a great gig, having fantastic results and great feedback from people, for some with the imposter chatter, is exactly what you want to leave the audience with. But boy, does it sometimes mean you've got a bit of anxiety for the next one. Will I manage to attain it next time around? And for me, on a personal note, there's that aspect of having done the Derek live session and being invited by Tony to come and do this session. I desperately want to achieve the same standards, but it's this anxiety of, will it turn out all right? Will it be okay? So thank you for inviting me to Let's See and let's find out what happens. The other thing that happens with the internal chatter is that sometimes we can find we want to dismiss the compliments, we dismiss the praise. And for some people, it's toe curling, it's excruciating. It's really difficult when you get a compliment, praise, positive feedback. And for some, they'll tell me that they delete the email straight away. I have to say, I really like the email, so feel free to send me one afterwards. But it's this aspect where some people find it so hard to accept the compliments or praise when they've done something well. There's also a dread of being evaluated, which is absolutely one that ticks my boxes at the moment. Doing my PhD, sending things through to my academic supervisors who are very knowledgeable, very capable, not on the right topic that I'm specifically focusing on, but they're very knowledgeable, very capable folks. I'm going, oh my goodness, is this the time they realize they've made a mistake letting me into university again? And there's a worry sometimes that if you open your mouth, if you ask a question at a meeting, if you make a comment, then others will discover how much you don't know. So these are some of the issues. Where does it come from and what can we do about it? Well, it comes from a number of different causes. Sometimes it's childhood messages, sometimes it's parenting. So hypercritical parenting, you come home from school and you're proud to have 8 out of 10 in your spelling test, and your parent goes, so which 2 did you get wrong then? Oh no, I must be 100% perfect to be loved, gets internalized. Hyper supportive parenting, which is where the pendulum swung to more recently for the generation Zs and Ys, is this supportiveness. You can do anything, darling. You'll be a fantastic, or whatever you choose to do, got interpreted as, I have to do everything really well. And then societal messages. What does society tell you your place is? And for me, being brought up in rural Lincolnshire from a farming background, I should have married a farmer. Becoming an international speaker and a professional speaker, being shy and actually being termed and literally talked about as the shy one of the 3 when I was with my parents and in the family, that was the known thing. That tells me that I shouldn't be out doing what I'm doing. So societal messages, cultural messages within organizations tell people where their place is. And if you stretched beyond those boundaries, that can trigger the imposter chatter. Anything that makes you feel other, looking around the room and thinking, do I belong here? Do I belong from a gendered perspective, from a sexual orientation perspective, from a diversity perspective, cultural backgrounds, neurodiversity background? It could be any of those, but it actually could be anything else that makes you feel other. And one of the sessions I gave in London as a face-to-face event, a little while ago, a lady came up to me and she said, oh, Kate, that's so me. To talk to me afterwards. I was brought up in a council house in the north. That has got nothing to do with her capability to do her job in a financial organization in the City of London. But in her mind, she felt other. So anything that makes you feel other on the inside can trigger the imposter chatter. Lack of like role models, because having a role model that is like you can help reduce the imposter chatter. But there's also something about our own perceptions of ourselves. Who do we see ourselves as being? What aspect of ourselves are we willing to put forward to the outside world? So thinking about that and thinking about where it comes from, what can you do to manage it? So for those of you who are either experiencing it still, which is fair enough, some of you may be, but some of you might have been experiencing it in the past, but know others who are now. And actually, from a coaching and supporting other people point of view, can I suggest you do not tell them that they are amazing? I'll tell you what you can tell them in a moment, but please don't tell them they're amazing, because what that does is it gives them that standard to live up to. It's like, oh my goodness, I've now got to live up to your expectations as well. So by all means, encourage people to talk about the mask, to talk about what's going on the inside. That's really healthy. But when somebody comes and speaks to you about their internal imposter chatter, don't go, what, you? Surely not. You're amazing, because that makes it even worse. So think about the self-talk and challenge your self-talk. So there's a lot that I agree with when Stephen Campbell was talking about the cognitive psychology and the way in which we do our thinking and making our thinking positive absolutely can be really helpful. So challenging the self-talk in this way is to think about not saying, ah, yes, I just happened to get lucky, or yeah, they've just given me this option because Tony liked me, he's just being kind, or oops, they've made a mistake inviting me to the Golden Gate Breakfast Club, I really shouldn't be here. And when I got a distinction for my first ever academic essay at the University of East London in 2013, I was going, can't be me. Can't be me. That doesn't match up. I'm the one that doesn't have a first degree. I'm the one that failed. I'm not academic. I'm not clever. Definitely made a mistake. So that piece about making a mistake can be something that's an interesting mindset. So we need to challenge that self-talk. Can I also suggest you challenge the other excuses that we might put? And it's because I worked really hard. So I've got that success because I've worked really hard, or I'm just doing my job. Removing the word just out of your language. Nobody is just a cleaner at the moment. We absolutely recognize the importance of that. And hey, if I can do it, then anyone can. Not right. If you are doing it, others could do it, but you are the one who is doing it. And no amount of luck or hard work will create success without knowledge, skills, and capability. So it's recognizing that, yes, success has something to do with a bit of luck and a bit of hard work. But if that's all you had, without the knowledge, skills, and capabilities, may I suggest I don't think you would be successful. So it's starting to recognize your own knowledge, skills, and capabilities. What are you good at? And this is where noting down the positive feedback can be really helpful. So like me, you probably do keep these emails. You probably love getting the recommendations and the testimonials maybe on LinkedIn and comments from clients and people that have listened to you. And as was being mentioned earlier now, who was that? Susan, talking about the students coming back to you afterwards. You're a former head teacher and saying, yes, you know, coming back and you made a difference. That's really lovely to hear. But if you've got the imposter chatter going on, the chances are you might not keep hold of that positive feedback. And so when the imposter chatter comes back up and you maybe have a little bit of a wobble, you're going, and it's not then accessible in your brain. So we need to store the positive feedback somewhere. And I'm guessing that pretty much every one of you will have that feedback folder. We'll have a folder. It might be called Wonderful Me. It might be called Bragafile, or it might be simply called Feedback, which is what I've termed mine, in your emails, where you store all of those lovely positive messages that you get. And if you don't have one of those already, can I suggest you set one up and start to store the positive feedback? And if you're coaching others, suggest that they start to store their positive feedback too. But it's not just about storing it. There's a little bit more that you need to do with this positive feedback to help combat the imposter chatter. Because as I mentioned, do not tell people they are amazing. It's really helpful to have feedback that says why you are amazing. Giving somebody an email that says, great, fantastic job, absolutely amazing, well done, doesn't tell them what they did, doesn't tell them how to replicate it in the future. So if you could be specific, if you are giving feedback to others, be specific in the feedback that you give, rather than the accolade of amazing, tell them why. When you receive the feedback, if you get the high accolade one, then by all means go back to the feedback giver and ask them. So lovely feedback. Thank you so much. I would really appreciate you giving me a few pointers as to what made it amazing in your eyes so I can replicate that in the future. That would be really helpful. And then when you store your positive feedback, review it. Take a look at it on a fairly regular basis. You might want to do it weekly, you might want to do it monthly, but set a reminder in your phone and have that reminder on a regular basis to look at the positive feedback, because the issue I find is that people tend to only look at the feedback when they need a confidence boost, which is great because it absolutely does that. It gives you that confidence boost, but having the confidence boost for the one situation won't help you overcome the longer term imposter chatter. So the important part is to store the positive feedback, to review the positive feedback, and then one third step on this is to stop doing the, yes, but they're just being kind, they're being nice, they happen to like me, I happen to get lucky, I was just doing my job, and start to yes and the feedback. So this is an internal challenge. It's not an external thing. We all know that externally we should say, when we get positive feedback, we should say thank you on the outside. What tends to happen is people go thank you on the outside and the yes, but on the inside. I'm suggesting you yes and it on the inside. I'm not suggesting you yes and it out loud to everybody else, but yes anding on the inside means that you're going, yes, and I learnt this from that particular experience. Yes, and I used this bit of knowledge in that particular situation. Yes, and I enjoyed it because ... So you're yes anding it on the inside. And when you start to do that on a regular basis, coming back to the point that was made by Stephen at the beginning from a positive thinking perspective, that can really help you overcome the imposter chatter. Now, there's so much more that I can tell you about it. Having done 3 years of PhD research and 2 years of master's research into this topic, but I only have a short amount of time to tell you some things, and then I will very happily open it up to questions. So I'm going to finish this section by picking up on a favourite quote of mine, which this favourite quote of mine comes from Ray Kroc, who founded McDonald's. And I came across this a number of years ago, which helped me boost my confidence levels. But there's also something about looking at yourself, which I'll pick up on in a moment. And the favourite quote is, there are 2 states in life. You can be either green and growing or ripe and rotting. The choice is yours. So which would you rather be, green and growing or ripe and rotting? And my suggestion is that, of course, we're going to choose the green and growing. But actually, that is quite an uncomfortable place to be. When you're stretching your comfort zones, for me personally, it helps so much to label it as green and growing. But my green and growing stretch now is not so much to stretch the comfort zones, to do things that scare me outside, but it's actually to stretch the comfort zone on the inside, to challenge myself. And this is the challenge that if you're experiencing the imposter chatter or know others who do, that I'd like you to pass on or think about doing for yourselves. The challenge is to rethink who you are now and be green and growing. So we so often compare ourselves to other people, which we shouldn't. We should compare ourselves to ourselves and grow into who we are now. And I think that takes some courage. So thank you for inviting me to talk. I'm going to open it up to questions and be happy to take your questions, your thoughts, your comments.
Thank you, Kate. That was I like how you closed it with the green and growing or ripe and rotting quote. That was appropriate, and you stuck to the timeline beautifully. So my hat's off to you. So much good content. I took about 10 pages of notes while you were talking. My fountain pen ran out of ink. All right, Derek, why don't you start? I know you always have a question.
And Patricia's there busy waving at me as well. So.
Thanks.
I'll go first if I can. Kate, so men get this as well. It's not a woman's thing, but those people.
Well, you've seen that from the poll right now. If you look at who's been taking it,
but I mean, all the research I read up to meeting you and you telling me, and me knowing that I had the imposter syndrome, I thought that was my feminine side before I spoke in front of an audience.
Yeah,
but
it's interesting. So what happens is that the media tend to pick up on, oh, it's a woman's thing, woe is me, oh dear, it's a confidence issue. It's not. Men and women can deal with it differently, but they absolutely experience it. Yeah, so research indicates, as does this poll today, indicates that men and women will experience it roughly equally.
And I just think guys blag it a bit better sometimes. I know
Guys are socially conditioned to pick themselves up, dust themselves down. So social psychology knows that men tend to be, as boys, conditioned to push through things. So if you happen to be operating in a male environment, or if you happen to have a number of brothers, then you may be brought up to push yourself and do things anyway if you're of the other gender. However, men still experience the imposter chatter because they also have the push and the expectation of being successful. They've got to succeed. And what if this time it doesn't work out? So there's different pressures there from a gendered perspective.
Thank you.
Patricia, you were busy waving. Derek jumped in. He got in first. Sorry, Patricia.
Well, thank you for letting us know that Derek does have a feminine side. Those of us who see him as a macho man. One, would you, before I make my comments and ask a question, would you like to translate for my American friends what a little bit of a wobble means?
That's an interesting point, isn't it? Because what I'm thinking of needing to translate, yes, a little bit of a wobble is where you have this internal self-doubt of going, oh, and so literally there's a tremble that goes on the inside that happens. So thank you, Patricia, for that translation notes for me in the future as well.
It is so fun as a British person every so often, and there were several phrases that reminded me, I know what she means, and I haven't heard that in a long time. To pick up, I loved what you said about removing the just, because when I coach brilliant engineers on technology, they talk about simply and basically. I say there's nothing simple and basic about what you're talking about. It's the complexity that makes it as valuable. You have to simplify the complexity. All right, very good. Then your idea of when, especially those of us who do give feedback to clients or our employees, to say you're amazing without a specific example is brilliant. And what you did that was brilliant that a lot of people don't know how to do, so I would like to pat you on the back for it. It's for any speaker or consultant and coach to live within the time loan of 30 minutes, but let us know you could do days of this based on 3 years of 3-year PhD and 2 years of master study. I couldn't, but I'm valuing your time slot. Not many people know how to do that in a subtle way that isn't showing off. So that was brilliant. Now, as a speaker, and I know everyone was curious, they might not think to ask, how did you do what you did? Was it a picture on picture like I put in my square? But I've never seen anyone do a picture in picture with a circle before.
Well, I have to credit Joanne Lockwood for that. And Joanne is a member of the remote speaking Facebook group, which Alan Stevens set up. So some of you may already be aware of that group. And Joanne and I had a consultation session last Friday. So for me, it's new. I've been desperately wanting to spend some time getting together with something called OBS, Open Broadcast Software. And in the early stages of the pandemic, Alan Stevens set up that Facebook group, which is brilliant. But what I did was I purchased a number of bits of kit, one of which is this Stream Deck. And it gathered dust for ages on my desk. And I thought, I downloaded OBS software. I tried to use it, didn't have any success. Exactly. That's it. Open broadcast software. And I didn't know how to use it, but I then eventually thought I have got to get to grips with this. So I spent some time last Friday with Joanne, one-to-one, and she helped me do this, which it's brilliant. It's set up. She's got the Circle program. She downloaded it into my computer. And all I need to do now on this Stream Deck is press a quick button. And the slides that are on the PowerPoint go straight into my picture. And so what I asked Tony to do was I asked Tony to spotlight me, which then means my picture is full on the screen for people unless
Yeah.
you've chosen something else. Yeah, absolutely. You've got it right there, Tony. Both of those.
Okay, because OBS is very complicated. We do vMix, which we're just learning. So I have a Stream Deck. So that is my full screen. This is me, and this is picture in picture, all with clicking a different Stream
Yeah.
Deck button. But of course, now this is boring to anyone who isn't a speaker, but congratulations, your true personality came through, and it was a wonderful message and great advice. Thank you very much, and thank you, Derek, for introducing you to our group.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I've just put into the chat one that I've also used, which is absolutely extremely simple to set up, is So it's a really weird name, but is a very simple, easy to set up option, which will give you this. But what I've noticed that has also is the logo in your picture at the bottom left-hand corner. So, you know, it's up to you, but Joanne is brilliant on OBS, and she just sorted it out within an hour, which was brilliant.
I'm glad you actually brought that up, Patricia. I was intrigued, but I was too busy on other topics paying attention to Kate. And actually, Kate, I have to say, this is the second time I've heard your presentation. You're absolutely right. You pick up things you didn't pick up the first time around. So it's really great hearing you on the second time.
Thanks, Craig. So I'm open. If anybody's got questions or other comments that you want to make, feel free to ask.
I would say something.
Susan?
First of all, I think it was the 80s or 90s, very best-selling book, The Impostor Syndrome, that started all this.
Yes.
And probably based on some of the research. But I have listened to so many people, when you talked about imposter chatter on about their imposter syndrome as almost an excuse for everything. And it's, I have to put on glasses to see.
That is the one. That is the 1985 copy, which I didn't buy until I was doing my master's research, but it's by Pauline Clance. Yeah.
Yeah, now that's Impostor Phenomenon, but we had a book that was called The Impostor Syndrome. In the pop psychology, it became quite the bestseller. But you're the first person who actually linked research and organized it in a way that I've taken many, many notes. I just hope I can read them later. But my kudos to you, because I wondered, why was I beginning to hear chatter about imposter syndrome? And I realized someone gave a TED talk, and all the TEDies jumped in and embraced this concept without really knowing what they're talking about. So thank you for organizing it, for presenting it, for allowing us to have some of the research and the thoughts behind it. So thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you. And it's interesting, there's the TED Talks, but also I think Sheryl Sandberg brought it into the forefront of people's minds when she wrote Lean In. She talked about imposter syndrome in that book. And then Michelle Obama more recently in Becoming has talked about her imposter syndrome. And it's become sexy to have imposter syndrome. And I go back to your point, it's actually not that healthy or helpful for the person that experiences it. We've got enough stress in our lives. We don't need extra stress about worrying whether or not we're good enough. So we need to let go of that and accept that we are. But the piece in my research that I'm looking at is actually, I think that takes courage. It takes courage to accept your greatness, as well as courage to overcome some of the negative stuff. And sometimes it's that bit that's important.
I'm going to share something with you. When I was doing the research for the Secrets of Savvy Networking, and I wanted to find out what people found offensive or positive, one of the things someone presented to me was, when we negate and dismiss someone's compliment, what we're doing is insulting their judgment. So think about that the next time.
Oh, I'm excited now, Susan, because that's one of the things that I've really worked on is in my own mindset is that, or if you get this load of positive feedback, everybody else is telling you you can do this. And yet you're still going inside your own head. Oh, but what if this time it doesn't work out? Oh, but if only they knew that ... How arrogant is it for you to believe yourself over and above everybody else? So yeah, that reminds me of that. So yeah, thank you for that, Susan, because when I've really thought about it, I'm trying to stay humble. People say, oh, I want to keep my imposter chatter, I don't want to become arrogant. It's like, believing yourself over and above everybody else's positive feedback is actually arrogant, not humble. So yeah, thank you.
I love that point.
Well, seeing there is silence, let me jump in. But I remember as a younger woman, and most people would think Fripp's very self-confident. And of course, this grows with experience. But I remember I would say that was when we are younger women, especially when I was, say, in my 30s, 40 years ago, you think the men in your life are smarter than you, and you sometimes, whereas by the time you get to be 50, you say, no, I don't agree with that. Whereas at 30, you might accept it. So could you give us a couple of comments from your research on dynamics of couples and how this relates?
If I had researched couples, I would, but I didn't research couples. I researched successful entrepreneurs. And so I interviewed 6 men and 6 women. And at the moment for my master's research, I'm actually focusing on people in the world of work, particularly financial and insurance sectors. But what I do know from reading other people's research is that there is a piece of research that indicates having a supportive partner helps you overcome your imposter chatter. So the supportive partner can help give you that view of, this is what I've seen you do, this is how I've seen you overcome it before, this is what I know that you can do, and they help you unpick some of it rather than simply tell you you are amazing. So there is some research that indicates a supportive partner can do that role. There's also research that indicates a mentor can do that role really effectively as well. So depending upon where you're at, because some partners either aren't supportive or support in a different way and simply just want to boost you and tell you how amazing you are and think that that's a really good thing to do, which actually, as I said, can make it worse. So if you can find a mentor, that's also a really good way from a research perspective to help that boost. But I don't know of anything research-wise in dynamics of couples in the way in which you maybe describe it. But what I would also say is one piece I do know from a manager-subordinate relationship is that if the manager experiences their imposter chatter, so if they're experiencing the imposter phenomenon, they are more likely to delegate to someone who is lower in confidence than they are to someone who is high in confidence. Both are competent, but the confidence issue, the manager is more likely to delegate to the people who are lower in confidence. The reasoning that's surmised in the research, because they do a piece of research and then they don't look at why that is, because they're looking at what it is first. So the why that's surmised there is that the manager is trying to avoid people pushing back. So if you're delegating to someone and you're experiencing the imposter chatter, you're more likely to delegate to someone who's lower in confidence than somebody else in your team. The other thing about confidence that you mentioned there, Fripp, is this piece of actually it's a separate psychological construct. So we can have healthy self-esteem, we can have a healthy sense of confidence, which is self-efficacy, the perceived ability to succeed at a given task, and we can still experience the imposter chatter. So it's an interesting psychological construct. And I love the fact that human beings are complex and we're complex creatures, and we're not easy to understand, but we are interesting and fascinating to explore and try to understand.
Kate.
That was a brilliant answer. So don't want to cut you off, Derek. I know Susan Rowan's toes are tingling and her eyes are watering because of how you answered that question. And for mere mortals, It's learning from how brilliant people answer questions. I don't know by my own research, however, other people I've studied who research would tell you that is a woman who knows how to answer a question. Again, I am your big fan club, and hopefully I am giving you specifics of why not only am I learning from what you're saying, I'm learning and taking notes on how I can make my work and feedback better. Congratulations. And may I make one comment about the advantage of having virtual meetings? We have friends and speakers from across the pond that would never happen at a live meeting.
Yeah, thank you very much,
things, Patricia. Just a little bit of feedback for you. I'm not sure your microphone is working as well as it should do for your masterclass you got on Saturday. On my computer, it sounds something wrong with it. I don't know if other people are getting that, but I thought you might need.
Patricia, you need to turn your ATEM down a little bit. It's saturating. Oh, now you're muted.
I'll have Harold look at it because it's
please, because you're saturating.
Yeah,
it sounded pretty good on my end.
Kate, my question was, does the imposter syndrome kick in more first thing in the morning? It seems to me, I sort of wake up and wonder if I've really done these things and I've really got to do it. And then I have to have a chat with myself, maybe go for a run and a cup of coffee. And then I'm kind of all right again. But certainly first thing in the morning.
I think that's a really interesting observation, Derek. Again, I don't know of research that shows it, but personal experience, I find it kicks in more when I've had a holiday or a weekend. Monday mornings, I'm going, do I really want to get up? Let me just stay under the duvet and not do this presenting stuff anymore. Thank you very much. So it can kick in, I think, when there's been a lull of doing something. So sleeping overnight would be a lull, I guess, from that perspective. There's also something about it kicks in massively if the previous one hasn't gone quite to plan. So I experienced a Zoom dropouts 3 times in a 2.5-hour session with an international client, and I was mortified. But actually, when I got to speak to the client 2 weeks later, I sent them 2 emails, one immediately, of course, and then I discovered what the problem was and sent them a second email the next day once I'd found out what the problem was. I didn't hear back from the client and go, oh gosh, I'd worked with them before and I was working with them again. So on the next time I worked with them, I mentioned it. She said, it was no problem at all. They were fine with it. But the next time I went to present, having had those Zoom dropouts, even though I'd found the solution to the problem, I was discovering that my own imposter chatter was really high. My anxiety was a lot more than it was before. Yeah. So morning thing, not so sure of, but definitely I think there's a lull and there's a mistakes thing that can kick in, Derek. I'd be interested, Randall, obviously not being an NSA member, the Speaker magazine, about the imposter syndrome. I'd actually be really interested to have a look at that, because there is so much stuff that is a misnomer out there. And on my website, you'll find, if you look at kateatkin.com/imposter, there's various things from that page and other topics, so blog posts that I've put out on the 5 myths of the imposter phenomenon. There's stuff there that actually says people will talk about it being more of a women thing than a man thing. It isn't. It's not a confidence issue. It's a separate construct. And so it'd be interesting to see what the NSA's take of it is.
2 things there, Kate. I'll have to tell you, you said stuff 3 times in the last 2 minutes. So if it's easier if I tell you than Patricia does.
Stop it.
Hold off.
You'll be kinder than Patricia.
Oh, well, she's not kind to me. It's full on if I say that word. And secondly, it's my responsibility for not getting the NSA magazine, because we cancelled that when we were trying to keep the costs down, when PSA was not doing very well at all. So if there is any articles in that, I'd be very grateful to receive it from Patricia or Randall or Suzanne or anyone that's a member, because we don't get it.
Thanks very much for your comments. I really do appreciate them. Thank you so much. That's fantastic feedback from you.
I've got a question, Craig and Kate. What about the opposite of the imposter syndrome. In other words, somebody who really thinks they're smarter and better than they are.
Yeah. And that, Randall, I find fascinating because it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it's named after two psychologists, Dunning and Kruger. They termed it after themselves. So the Dunning-Kruger effect, I know, Susan, it did make me laugh. It's like, yay, this is the person who has a high perception of their ability, but either low actual ability or maybe even no actual ability. So yeah, they have this self-belief that I can do anything, and they don't have that evidence. So the Dunning-Kruger effect and the imposter phenomenon, neither of which are really healthy to have. We ought to have our perception of our ability and our actual ability match up over time. And interestingly, a quick comment about Dunning and Kruger brought up this effect in the late 1990s and coined the term because they read an article in a magazine about a bank robber in the States. I can't remember which city in the United States, but this bank robber had gone into two banks, smiled at the CCTV cameras as he walked in, not wearing a mask or anything, gave a big smile, and then got arrested by the police a few hours later. Really surprised that he was arrested, and went, "But I wore the juice." "You did what?" And he put lemon juice on his face, believing lemon juice would make him invisible, because lemon juice is used for invisible ink. Therefore, it would make him invisible. And Dunning and Kruger investigated that particular phenomenon. And that's how the opposite came into having a particular name there, Randall. So thank you.
Oh, so many puns on lemon.
That's like simply brilliant. That whole that whole line of answers. All I could think of is, it's like, so okay, let me get this straight. So basically, it's stunning and Kruger effect? Is that what stunning and
I'll put it into the chat so you've got the spelling.
Stunning. Oh, thank you.
Okay, stunning.
Yeah, I think we have another word for it in the US. I think we call it the BS factor.
I just kept thinking, it's like, as the president of the Golden Gate Breakfast Club, I fall in that category, that's that was great.
There's a surgical procedure to cure yourself from the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Oh,
I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. It's called the cranial rectal inversion. I don't know if anybody knows about that. I've had several in my day, so I survived.
That's brilliant. All right, any other questions?
Oh, also, the Dunning-Kruger effect also applies to my presentation next week about.
Antonio, you're breaking up a little bit.
Politics and advertising, and
yeah, I think we lost him.
That's
We've lost most of what you just said, Antonio.
He inadvertently muted, or you muted everyone.
I don't know. It's I don't know. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Now.
Okay. So the Dunning-Kruger effect, actually, now that you've told me about that, Kate, I'm going to apply it in part to my presentation next week about political advertising. And so there's a huge opportunity for us to make a big change in society by regulating political advertising. And the Dunning-Kruger effect shows what happens when you don't. So I hope folks can tune into next week's presentation. And I'd love to see you all there. And thanks for an amazing presentation. And I meant amazing in a genuine way, by the way.
Thanks, Antonio. Thank you.
All right, I'm looking at the clock. It's 8:53. So why don't we just take an opportunity to thank Kate again for joining us and making our morning so special here in the United States.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to join you. And as was said, to actually send me to San Francisco for one breakfast meeting, unlikely to happen, but it's been an absolute delight to be able to join you this morning in this virtual way. So thank you very much.
We're looking forward to having you come back again too. So I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. Thank you again, Kate. Okay.